if they were to use military force, an unlawful aggression. It would probably not achieve regime change. It would not achieve an additional bout of concessions from Iran, and it would cause great destruction and great loss of life against a background, of course, which we know full well, that the Americans do war in the Middle East extremely badly. Whether you're looking at Iraq or their endorsement of Saudi actions in Yemen or Israeli actions in Gaza, the outcomes have often been appalling. And when analysts point to the possibility of a ghastly end to a war in the Middle East, they are right.
Well, look, let's just pick up on a story that has come in while we have been on air, and that is that the UK has withdrawn its staff from Iran after closing its embassy in Tehran. The Foreign Office says it's a temporary precautionary measure due to the ongoing security situation as tensions grow between the US and Iran. Well, let's now speak with Sir Richard Dalton, who's the former British ambassador to Iran. Sir Richard, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
What do you read into what's happening here?
It's a wise precaution. It echoes the call by the Americans to their citizens in Israel to consider leaving. It is not an indication of whether or not the next round of talks is going to succeed. We don't know how wide the gaps are, but it is clearly a precaution particularly relevant through the British Embassy in Tehran, which, as I know from my personal experience there, is a lightning rod for popular anger against the United States. The United States has no facilities in Tehran, and Britain is perceived as the closest ally of the United States.
And look, what do you read into how likely military action may be in terms of the US striking Iran? We know that these talks between Iran and the US were not constructive. They haven't been constructive so far. We know that there's this big military build-up of US capability in the Middle East. Do you think some kind of strike is likely or imminent?
You're wrong to say the talks have not been constructive. According to the Omani mediator, they have been constructive, with both sides willing to consider ideas to narrow gaps which they had not considered before. And this is a complicated and difficult issue, and the idea that it can be fixed with a few hours of talks is erroneous. There is absolutely no grounds for the United States to attack Iran at present. And if they are rattling the saber, then it's either because they intend to attack or because they want to increase pressure for concessions on Iran. And we don't know which of those theories is correct. And we don't know whether Iran is susceptible to making further concessions. And we don't know whether the United States is negotiating seriously. I mean, that question has to be put because it's obvious to all observers of the negotiations over decades that there is room for a compromise which would ensure the American objective that Iran will never have nuclear weapons. The terms which the Americans are currently apparently insisting on to achieve that aim are unnecessarily harsh.
And in all of these talks, are the rights of the Iranian citizens any factor in these talks? Because, of course, Donald Trump during the uprising indicated that help was coming. A lot of Iranian citizens were hopeful that help would come. There's been this absolutely brutal, bloody and violent crackdown on citizens. There were a few protests that flared up again over the last couple of days. Will America put anything like human rights on the table, or are they just focused on the nuclear program?
They're just focused on the nuclear program, but the political background includes human rights, and conceivably it could be part of President Trump's calculus in making the decision as to whether to use overwhelming force. But just to step back for a moment, it would be, if they were to use military force, an unlawful aggression. It would probably not achieve regime change. It would not achieve an additional bout of concessions from Iran, and it would cause great destruction and great loss of life, against a background, of course, which we know full well, that the Americans do war in the Middle East extremely badly. Whether you're looking at Iraq or their endorsement of Saudi actions in Yemen or Israeli actions in Gaza, the outcomes have often been appalling. And when analysts point to the possibility of a ghastly end to a war in the Middle East, they are right.
Well, look, thank you very much for your time. Very interesting conversation. That's Sir Richard Dalton, the former British ambassador to Iran. And thank you very much for that.